Do you like sports, Timmy? I sure do. I'm really excited to talk about sports and sports podcasts today because the sports fan is an unusual beast. Regardless of age, race, gender, what part of the country they're from, sports is a business, but it is a business that parents and children share stories about. It is a business that human beings care about and interact about and are passionate about. People are invested in their favorite sports teams like they're invested in almost nothing else, right? No matter where you live in the country, people will get together about their favorite sports teams and they will celebrate the wins. They will lament the losses. Personally, I'm from Boston, a big Boston sports fan. So we get together and celebrate the wins or talk about how many wins we've had or how big the wins were and how many big wins there were. And that probably endeared me to absolutely nobody in the room. So I'm gonna drop that for now. But what happens with the humans that are attracted to sports? They are also attracted to sports podcasts, and like the teams they support, they self-select the sports podcasts that they want to listen to. So they are passionate and loyal people. So what I'm going to talk about today first is some brand new research, we have not released this, about the audience, the humans who consume sports podcasts. So in a few moments, you're going to see some slides and it'll say sports podcast consumers. I'm not talking about sports podcasts. I am talking about the humans, the passionate, loyal humans that those podcasts attract. So last year we did a study called the Advertising Landscape. This was part 2 of that, Attention and Trust. This was a survey of 5,000 Americans 18 plus about 22 different ad-supported platforms. So not just podcasting, but also commercial broadcast radio and Facebook and TikTok. If you could slap an ad on it and serve an advertising message in any way or possible, that's what we looked at. The first question that we asked people about this was really about the content. And I want to establish the content first because the sports podcast consumer, again, they self-select the podcasts that they want. So there is an inherent trust there. And that starts with the content. One of the questions that we asked was, I trust the content moderation and or quality control on each of these ad-supported media, right? So for the active consumers of podcasts, 46% said that they trust that content. That was good for 4th on that list and ahead of pretty much every social media platform, right? The social media platforms you see are pretty well far down the list. So that 46% though, amongst the humans who consume sports podcasts was 52%, more than half, right? Are saying that they trust the moderation of the content. Similarly, the content is generally factual and accurate. Podcasts in general here are 3rd on that list behind only Discord and Twitch. Every traditional broadcast media platform, every social media platform are all well below that. In fact, Facebook is at 27%, right? And again, with the humans that consume sports podcasts, that 51% is 57%. So again, we are talking about an audience that is even more passionate, even more loyal than the already passionate and loyal podcast audience in general. That extends to the advertising, and this is a truly remarkable finding. We asked people if each of these media platforms effectively prevents misleading or false advertising, right? This is a question about advertising. Nobody will say that they like advertising, but you're going to see some positive answers here. Podcasting, again, is 4th behind Telegram, which really doesn't have ads, Twitch, which is a very similarly creator-based medium, and streaming AM/FM radio at 41%. The humans who listen or watch sports podcasts, however, are 50%. That's half giving a positive statement about advertising. Again, that's really remarkable. Last couple of slides I want to show you before we kick off a conversation here. The advertising on this media platform feels authentic and natural. And here again, podcasting is 3rd on this list at 48%. Facebook is 32%. Facebook is 30%. Snapchat, 32%. So this is a significant portion of humans expressing a positive sentiment about advertising. And that 45% overall is 55% with the humans who consume sports podcasts. That passion, that loyalty, it extends to everything that they talk about, and they are buying into the advertising. And that really leads us to this, which is what I think sports podcasting is all about. I trust the people delivering the advertising messages. Again, this is a question that is explicitly about advertising. Podcasting is third again at 39%, and the sports podcast consumer audience is 47%. It's significantly higher. What does all of that mean? That means when you are running advertising, when you are messaging on a sports podcast, you are reaching an audience that is even more predisposed to celebrate, to support the creators, to buy into the topic, because it is a topic that is more than just an interesting brand, although we love our brands. It is a topic that is more than about a business. It is a topic that is about a thing that parents and children, friends and family bond over. And as people select into those podcasts, they believe what they hear. They believe the hosts. They treat the podcasts as credible, and they celebrate the support and the supporters of that content. So that's some brand new research. We'll probably put that out a little bit later. But I want to start, Bryan, with you. And I'll throw this open to everyone afterwards. And then I will sit down and hopefully shut up for a while. Did anything surprise you about this research coming from your perspective at Locked On?
So when I think about the sports podcast consumer, I often just look in the mirror. I am very much the target sports podcast consumer. And I think about how I engage with other media channels and how I trust the content and what I listen to and what I engage with. And almost every other media channel, I could be watching my favorite show and I still find myself doom scrolling on Instagram and not really paying attention to anything in particular. But when I listen to my Kings podcast, I'm a diehard Sacramento Kings fan. When I listen to that, I'm listening to the content so I can be the smartest person in my golf group or when I go to the game. You know, I want to consume every little detail of what they're telling me because I want to become a smarter sports fan. And, you know, when I listen to politics, I listen to a wide variety of different shows, right? Everybody has a differing opinion. My Kings host doesn't need to sugarcoat it for me. We're not good. We haven't been good in 20 years. You know, and they don't need to sugarcoat it for me. We're all on the same team, you know, and so it doesn't surprise me because when I lean into content, I really don't engage with anything the way that I do with sports podcasts.
Just a quick follow-up, Bryan. As a Sacramento Kings fan, how do you do it? How do you get through your days? How do you live?
I think this goes into a little bit about why sports podcasts are so effective is because I don't have a choice. I was pretty much born this way. I've been a Kings fan since I was a kid. And there's nothing that can change it. There's just no other team that I'll ever root for. There's nothing else that I'm really more passionate about. It brings me back to my childhood. So I don't have a choice, Tom. I'm like a Jets fan, unfortunately. It's the same thing.
So that's some breaking news. The universe is deterministic, and we have no free will. We can announce that here at Podcast Movement Evolutions. Kia, did anything surprise you from this research?
Nothing surprised me, but I was pleasantly surprised. As a media buyer, I love to see the channels where our audience is actually trusting and listening to our message. So, you know, I think if people are listening to those hosts about their fantasy football picks and trusting that, they're also going to trust those host-read messages. So I was pleasantly surprised, I would say.
All right. And how about you, Kellie?
I was not surprised. As somebody that works closely with a lot of creators, I think that sports represents the trifecta in podcasting. It is long form storytelling, it is statistics, and it's relationship. A lot of these hosts and creators have very deep relationships with their passionate fans, which keep them hanging on and, sticking around for more and more. And I think it's a really great trifecta of representing how this content lives in sports and the connection with fans.
Absolutely. And I think what we see with the sports podcast consumer is that they will even do things against their best interest, right, Bryan?
Kellie said hanging on, and
For dear life.
that pretty much describes being a sports fan of not a winning team. So
100%.
I'm a Husker fan, so I feel you. I empathize. Yeah.
I will shut up about all of this. Kellie, I want to stick with you. So you're with SiriusXM. The SiriusXM podcast network has a very large, diverse portfolio, 70 million consumers. How do you tackle the podcast category specifically, particularly, or any different?
So it's really interesting because we have a long-standing, SiriusXM satellite portfolio with a lot of sports content. You can get 24/7 sports content on satellite radio. So that's really the foundation of where we began in sports content. But as SiriusXM evolved into podcasting, it became very important to cross over and bridge between podcasting and satellite. So we have somebody like Stephen A. Smith, who has a podcast and a satellite show with us. We have a podcaster, Katie Nolan. She also represents us on Mad Dog Radio. So we're consistently looking at how do we create more of an omni-channel approach with our content. We also have fantasy footballers who are straight podcasters with us and, have been true pioneers in the space when it comes to fantasy and sports content.
And I can attest to the satellite part of that because way back on my 1998 Subaru Forester, the first new car I ever bought in my life, the very first thing I did was go get one of those just ungodly tack to your roof and run cables in through your windows.
Yeah.
Satellite radio receivers, so I could get sports, and so that was a big part of that. Kia, obviously, we're talking about how the sports podcast audience operates a little bit differently from other podcast audiences. Not better or worse, just differently. When you're evaluating a sports podcast as a brand partner, right? What are you looking for? Does that lens shift at all? Is there any tweaking that you do to how you view those?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say in the sports genre over any other podcast genre, there are like local podcasts you can focus on the Kings, for example, and then there's national, right? I'm just an NFL fan nationally. So that is what I think is really unique and different. Depends on the message that the client wants to get across. If they want more mass awareness, we go with those mass awareness channels. If they want to have a local message, we can go with those local teams within each geo. So I think that is what's really cool and different about sports podcasting. I would also say sports is 24/7. So we can always, focus on a tentpole moment, whether that's, the draft or a Super Bowl, even Travis Kelce getting engaged, right? Like all of those sports moments we can capitalize on. So I think that is what makes sports podcasts so different and why brands love working with them.
I have a very controversial question. It's a complete curveball.
Oh, God.
You're all going to hate me for this. We all know how targetable podcasting is. It's an extraordinarily targetable medium, certainly geographically. Are there any fan bases or regions that convert better?
Ooh. Bryan, that might really be one that you could dive into.
Sure. I don't know if I'd say convert better. There are more passionate fan bases, right? So Locked On has leaned into a number of specific cities, whether it's Minnesota or Cleveland, LA, of course, but actually some of those smaller markets. Atlanta has just these absolute die-hard fan bases. We talk about the culture of it. It really is their whole life in some cases. There's a lot that goes on in LA. But in Minnesota, the Vikings are kind of like everything there. So I don't know if I could say specifically whether they convert better, but there are just fan bases that are more rabid than others. Don't go into the Raiders black hole. That's just the next level. So
go ahead.
Yeah, I think that certainly with podcasting, we are seeing, I think, some more robust fan bases based on where the actual podcasters originate from. Fantasy Footballers is a great example of that because they're Texas-based. They have a huge, robust fan base here. Also, too, when we see some podcasters go on the road and do a tour, I think you can really identify where some of those hotspots are for podcasters in general. But I think conversion across the board, we're seeing less region based and location based and more so what platform they're delivering their content on, whether it be video or social or audio, is where we're really seeing some of that powerful conversion.
Kia, have you noticed anything like that when you're making buys, or are you way smarter than that?
No, I think I haven't noticed specifically, but I think going back to the local versus national, if you have a host read that says, go Bills or go Big Red or something, I think if you speak to that audience specifically, you may see a little more connection. It may pique an interest a little bit more to convert versus just more of a national awareness message.
I'm sorry, but you all had the wrong answer. The correct answer was Boston.
Trick question.
Boston was the correct answer. But thanks for playing our game. I really appreciate that. So, Bryan, I want to go back to you for a second. The research that I showed earlier, which you've all been able to spend some time with, showed a really high level of trust between the podcast consumer for sports and the hosts and the advertising messages, that kind of halo effect. Why do you think that is? And is it different than other podcasts, or is there some other phenomenon going on? Why do you think that trust is there?
Yeah, if you are not a diehard sports fan, that's okay. That's okay. But it's hard to truly understand the depth of passion of a sports fan, right? My Kings fandom goes back 30 years. I think about it. You asked the question. I think about it going to the Kings games with my father as a 5-year-old, and now I'm taking my 5-year-old to Kings games. And it's that lived experience that it truly becomes part of your life. It's part of your family. And so the content that you're listening to is more than just content. I saw a poster for the best one yet. One of my favorite podcasts ever. There's nothing that Jack can say that I'm gonna trust and lean into as much as I am about my sports hosts, because they are sharing the same lived experience that I am. Every Kings fan, the host, they are in the trenches with me, right? They as you said it, they celebrate the wins and the losses together. And so when a brand taps into that in an authentic way, some things that Kia and I work on together, when brands are able to tap into that passion and into that fandom, specifically with team-specific podcasts, right? Again, I love fantasy football, but when I'm leaning into the Kings or the 49ers, when I want to know exactly about what's happening with that team, with my team for that matchup, no one gets it more than my host. And they have no real reason to lie to me, especially the Kings host. They can tell me how it is. There's just nothing else that just can really compare to the shared lived experience that you have with that host in any other genre.
Just a quick follow-up. Why would you expose a child to that?
There's not much else to do in Sacramento.
All right. I'm gonna move this to you, I think, Kia. So the media environment's pretty fragmented. It's getting more and more fragmented every year. It's difficult to get, reach in almost anything. But sports podcasts do seem to be gaining some momentum. What do you think is fueling that?
Yeah, I think there are two reasons. I think the first is like the passion, right? And you just talked about having SiriusXM in your car. We're used to listening to sports all the time, whether you have ESPN on your TV all the time, or you have, I remember my dad listening to sports talk radio 24/7 in his car. What's great about podcasts is how portable they are. So people can continue that sports knowledge, that sports content when they're, on the subway, at work. So I think the portability of podcasts is why sports is growing so much, because people are constantly consuming their sports content. I think the second is that people love their athletes and they love the peek behind the scenes. Again, kind of going back to that Travis Kelce and the Kelce Brothers show example. They want to see the life of these people. These sports athletes also, they're kind of influencers now, right? And so if they have a podcast, you're learning more about them versus just what you see during their games. So I think just the obsession with athletes as, being super fans, seeing them as celebrities, I think that is another reason why, podcasting, again, gives you a peek behind the scenes of their life versus just seeing them play in the games.
Just a quick follow-up on that. We saw some great research from Greg Glenday at ACAST yesterday about how the term influencer is kind of rejected by the podcast audience, but they're very influenced by podcast hosts, right?
Yep.
Yep. Do you see that manifest itself to a different degree in sports?
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting that you talked about podcasters kind of rejecting influencer, but especially when I am buying a host read on a podcast for a brand, I have actually partnered with our influencer team to research. Sorry, any hosts in here, we research you front to back. Make sure you have never said anything negative about the brand or the space. You'd be surprised. And so we actually work with our influencer team to go through, the host's personal social channels, back 10 years to just make sure the content they've talked about is safe for our brands. So I think we need to see them as influencers, as media buyers, because the things that they say have an impact, to the listeners. If they've talked poorly about a brand 5 years ago, the listeners will remember and they will comment, wait, why are you doing a host read for this brand? You talked smack about them 10 years ago, right? So I think we have to treat them as such, because they are, a person, they're their own brand, and the things that they say all over social media, we need to make sure that, we have brand safe messaging.
Boy, I'd hate to be judged on anything I posted on Facebook 10 years ago.
I know.
Sorry.
Please don't scrub my social media.
It's such an interesting time, like talking about this influencer component, because there is so much that goes into being an athlete, right? There's grit, there's determination, there's resilience. I mean, coming off of the Olympics, there were so many great moments like Alyssa Liu and Lindsey Vonn, who really stood out as just these incredible athletes who overcame so much to be there. So I think that there's also this background, coming into loving sports content and loving the victory, even if there's not an actual medal at the end of it, right? Like, I think people would look at Lindsey Vonn and say, that was a victory. And she's inspiring a lot of people with how she's taking on what happened to her. And I think that's how people feel across the board about athletes and people who are representing sports in this ecosystem, because they are influencing people in such a big way. And I know we use the word influencer, kind of is podcasting or those influencers and, social influencers, but there is so much influence happening, across the board with athletes, with sports content. So I think it's an exciting time to talk about what that influence represents and how brands can be a part of that discussion.
It's really interesting too with celebrities and the influence and the brands that they're building. We talked about fragmentation, and it's fascinating to see. I think Pat McAfee is just a perfect example. And Kellie, you and I used to work on Pat's show. That is an athlete who has built a full 360-degree media brand around his influence, right? It's a TV show, it's socials, it's a podcast. There's so much that goes into that. You see other athletes building that, and how you define sports media today.
Absolutely.
It used to just be ESPN. You'd watch ESPN, or you'd watch Monday or Thursday Night Football. That was kind of the end all be all to the accessibility to the sports fan. But today there are just so many different avenues, and it's I'm sure challenging for brands to figure out the best path forward. But it's it's an exciting, it's a confusing time, but influence is kind of thrown around in a lot of different ways in this fragmented sports media landscape that we're dealing with.
Well, and there's also many podcasters and creators who don't necessarily fall into the genre of sports, but are also huge sports fans and so want to engage and talk about that on their show that might be more news or political or pop culture. So sports is bleeding into a lot of different genres, regardless. So it's interesting.
I think, I love what you said about, sports is now going into so many different channels. And I think that makes surrounding sports really accessible for a lot of brands, right? They don't have to pay for a Super Bowl ad anymore or be on Thursday Night Football. They can surround these sports podcasts and reach these sports audiences in a more, cost-effective way. They can have certain, I'm trying to say, like promotion codes and things like that, so they can actually track things a little bit better too. So I think for brands, though it is fragmented and there's a lot of different places, I think it is positive for smaller brands who want to touch sports fans.
And I think the fragmentation, it's almost like take away the veil of that and look at the creator as the foundation, right? And so you should look at a creator or a brand like Locked On where you are partnering with that entity, and no matter where that content is distributed, you should meet those audiences where they are, right? So take away the fragmentation, right? Because the audiences are there. You just have to figure out how to speak to them across those different channels in the right way, in an impactful way, and an authentic way.
Yeah, it's so important to be platform agnostic practically.
Agreed.
Now. You meet something at Locked On where the whole point is meet the sports fan where they want you to, right? I don't always have time to watch the game, whether it's, the podcast or an OT, CTV, kind of anything, wherever they're going to watch it, that's where you need to meet them.
Exactly.
Kia, I love the point you made about researching the shows and the hosts for,
Tom likes research. That's a surprise.
Research.
It reminded me of two things. Number one, I forgot to ask my favorite panel question, which is generally this. Kellie, in 2008, you tweeted the following.
Oh, God.
But I'm not going to ask that. But it reminds me of years ago, I lived in New York, and I listened to Mike and the Mad Dog on WFAN. And I sort of, grew up with that show a lot. And when callers would call in, they would call both of them on things that contradicted something they had said 2 years ago, 4 years ago, right? They have incredibly long memories. And the reason I bring this up is I think anybody in this business knows that podcast advertising has a tremendous lag. It goes on and on and on. And I think part of that is because this audience in particular have very long and good memories.
Yes, but I also think that they like to go back and consume content that, maybe there was a perspective shared about a player when they entered the league and now they're more seasoned and they want to go back and hear that initial analysis and compare it to that player's performance today. So I think, that going back and forth is very common in sports because it's really relevant information still. And I'm sure you, as a rabid Kings fan, can attest.
Yeah, it's, that's why Locked On is 5 days a week. It's every day. We always say at Locked On there's no off season for the real sports fan, right? A lot of advertisers think let's shut down NFL advertising after the Super Bowl. But if you're not paying attention to what's happening with the trades in the NFL right now, I mean, it is absolutely bonkers. It's all anybody's talking about in sports. And at the same time, March Madness is going on and the MLB opening day is upon us. So there's just so much to go on. But yeah, I think sports fans, especially those rabid sports fans, I mean, it's insane sometimes the amount of information that someone can recall. I saw something recently about a young man could get an A on his test if he could recall every NBA team who's ever won the championship in order. And he could. And it's just, how do you know that information? How do sports fans recall that information? It's just, like I said, it's lived experience. It's like the fabric of who they are. It's, in some cases, their entire identity. So it is fascinating how people just are constantly engaged and always looking back and staying current.
I think that's such a good point, Bryan, that seasonality is almost like diminishing in the sports space because there is so much to talk about, even if you are a very specific March Madness podcast or creator, you can transcend across, seasons and talk about, players and what else is going on in the space. So I think seasonality used to be a big talking point in sports that's slowly starting to dissipate.
Yeah, the college athletics, there's college football, there's college basketball historically, and it historically was pretty dead in the summer, right? But what's gone on with NIL and these teams being able to pay and attract higher talent, the recruitment process is entirely different now than it was 10 years ago. And so if you're a fan of the Arizona Wildcats, who this is our year, you're paying attention to, in the offseason, who is coming to the basketball team? Who are we pulling in? What stars are we going to find? And that impacts you for the next year. So you're always paying attention.
I think that's also a really good point, like the always on. And again, why this is so positive for brands. I'm always trying to make sure I'm advocating, for my brands. But in the podcast space, with the host reads, for example, like all a brand has to do is, provide a script or provide some talking points. And it's really easy to update creative throughout all these different flights. Like you can have a draft message, you can have a summer off-season message, you can have, and so I think, again, another benefit for brands in the podcast space is the ability to quickly turn around updated creative that you may not be able to do in some of the other spaces. Now, I know video that we're kind of moving towards is a little more difficult, but I think that is another benefit for brands. The constantly changing of messaging, super easy, super turnkey, having that podcast host's, flair and spin to it, I think it's not only effective, but it's just a really easy lift.
Yeah, I think putting the trust in the creator to deliver the message is so important for brands to get to that place where they have comfortability around that, because the creators know their audiences so well, and they know how to deliver that message that's going to be impactful, exciting, engaging, authentic for their audience.
Yeah.
So, such a good point.
Yeah. I think that's why, sports podcasts are more trusted, or the ads on sports are more trusted, is because, if brands let the hosts pull in their authenticity, pull in, the way they speak, know what words are going to pop for their listeners, then your ads are going to be more effective.
I'm going to throw in a little Mel Robbins. Just let them.
Exactly.
Yes. Isn't that the most important part about, any ad campaign? The most important part is creative, right? Across any channel. Sticky creative wins campaigns. And,
Definitely a huge part.
Yeah. And when brands lean into the creator, right? Like there's no more important thing when working with any podcast host generally, but with sports podcasts as well, because it's so current. And if you're not a diehard sports fan, it's hard to truly understand. There was a brand I worked with one time. They sent copy that was talking about the playoffs, and there were no playoffs happening. And I asked them what playoffs they were referring to. And they were just out of touch. They didn't understand. And I was like, give me the opportunity to kind of restructure this copy for you in a way that will feel authentic and in real time, and like speak to them in what's going on concurrently across sports. And so it's just so important. And that's when brands can really, really win, is there's scripts and then there's talking points, right? And it's trust your creator, trust your partner. You've already identified the podcast. You've already identified the partner. Yeah. Trust them, to bring your brand to life in that environment, because no one can do it better than the host.
Yeah, that's something I refer to as SAD, or seasonal advertising disorder, which is when you get some copy that's like, how about that local sports team? When you're getting together with your friends and family to root them on, like, come on, what are you talking about? Right. And the sports fan in particular, I think, sees right through that very, very quickly.
The funniest part about that copy was they sent another one back that said, your team didn't make the playoffs, and that's tough, and I was like, are you telling them that their team sucks? Like, that this is not the way to tackle that message. Please let me help you.
Also, how would they know who your team is, right? Like,
Exactly.
you're a fan of teams all over the country.
They were generalizing, apparently everyone is a Kings fan, and the team isn't going to make it to the playoffs.
And maybe your city may not make it, Sacramento. Let's talk about activations for a minute. And I know SiriusXM does a lot of activations. When you're doing an activation for a brand, do you approach it any differently with the sports part of your portfolio, or do you have a different lens for that?
I think we do a big activation at the Super Bowl, and we do Radio Row. We've started incorporating podcasting into that as well in recent years. So I think it really is about the fan experience when it comes to sports. Certainly, there's fan experiences. Obviously, when other genres go on tour and they want to be live in front of their audiences, but sports fans, they want to be up close and personal. They want to be in the mix of things. They want to go to a tailgate. They want to go to, a live podcast that's on Radio Row or a live, SiriusXM satellite show. So it's really about, I think, bringing the fans as close to the content as possible. We see a lot of fan engagement at these activations, and it's really important to the creators as well to touch their fans and speak to them intimately.
Bryan, did you want to add anything to that, or?
I couldn't hear your question.
Oh, okay. My question was, the Sacramento Kings. No, do you think about activations differently? I mean, you are very sports focused anyway. But when you're thinking about activations, how do you treat them differently, maybe than another genre or another kind of network?
Sure, it's about leaning into that fandom, right? So that whether it's broad strokes across a league or, again, team specific, which is what we focus on, you think about how to engage with that specific fan, right? The Raiders fans are different than the Patriots fans. Little classier, would you say? The Patriots fans maybe a little bit? Not really.
Oh, no.
But it's how you lean into that fandom, right? Where, again, I talk about the best one yet. It's just a different type of passion and a different type of listening experience. So the way that you have to engage with that just has to vary. It has variables to it.
Yeah, I think Kellie brought up a really good point about, events and going back to these hosts being influencers. I think when you look at activations for these podcast hosts, it can be really 360, right? Like, can we be on their social? Can we do events with them? And again, that's bringing you more behind the scenes of these athletes that they want to learn more about, meeting them in person. You follow them on social media, listen to their podcasts. So that's a great way for brands to have multiple touch points, added frequency, so that these fans remember your brand and hopefully convert at some point.
I think, and this is something I've been talking about a lot in the research that I've been looking at and writing about, is that I think podcasting is the most flexible medium.
Totally.
And there are the obvious sort of touch points for that. It can be audio. It can be video. There's a social component.
Yep.
There are clips, right? All of these things work together in concert to kind of meet the consumer, and in this particular case, to meet the fan wherever they are and however they want to consume that content. And I'll just throw this open to all of you, either from a brand perspective or as publishers. How does that, do you sell that flexibility to people, and how do you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's critical right now to make sure that we are going into partnership with creators who are open and willing to integrate brands across all of these touch points. So, obviously, audio is the foundation of our business. However, we're expanding into video and social and live events. Fantasy Footballers is a great example of this with us. They have incredible video content. They have beautiful studio that we can incorporate product placement. We did a great integration last year with Paramount Plus, who kind of owned their studios for a period of time. And then they incorporated the messaging, obviously, into their audio content, their video content. And then we're consistently looking at ways to bring the fans in for those live experiences. So the multiple touch points are just where things are evolving. And I think also what the fans want as well. And it's an incredible opportunity for brands to be a part of that.
And that is so important to a flexibility. So, if it's a brand who has a product, you can just have a product placement and maybe a quick ad with it. Or if it's a brand who, we don't have any video, we only have a script, or we only have, display ads, we can do, social or host reads. So I love that it is so 360, because brands can come in at different touch points. They can totally do the whole big kit and caboodle, but it gives them, again, so many different ways to interact with these fans and consumers, with whatever they have in their creative arsenal.
And we do a lot of collaboration with our
Yes,
creators.
yep.
We might bring a brand to them and it's like, okay, here's their idea,
Yep.
but react to it. Give us your perspective on what you think might work better, might be more authentic to your audience. So it really is, there's a lot of collaborative work that has to take place in order to make sure that it's going to deliver on your KPIs and your goals, but also stay true to the mission of that creator.
Totally. And I think when brands reach out and want to do podcasts, we really tell them, you have got to be flexible. You have got to control the reins a little bit, and let it be authentic. So it just feel like another, ad slapped. So I love when the brand is flexible to work with the creators, and the creator is also flexible. Like, that partnership is really where the authenticity thrives.
Great.
Yeah, and we go into the trust and the flexibility in the campaigns. You think about sports sponsorships. There's the shot clock countdown. There are these pre-existing sponsorships. At Locked On, we don't have anything like that, because the integration has to be bespoke to the brand message. And so we work with the brand. I don't go pitch the brand, hey, here's an idea for you. It's, I know we can work with you. What's your brand message? What are the goals that you're trying to convey? Trust us to bring that to life. The work that we do with ARM and FanDuel is a perfect example of that. We have team specific podcasts across every single league. Every ad read within those shows for FanDuel references team specific odds and we're 5 days a week. So the NBA games going on throughout the week, we have constantly updating real-time odds for the team that they most care about. And FanDuel can't update that copy for us that fast. They just have to trust us. And we've been in partnership for years now, and they trust us, and they give us that flexibility, and they say, do what we know you can do best to bring our brand to life in the most authentic way in real time. And that has led to an incredible partnership.
Yeah, and I want to stay with you for a second, Bryan. I think the going back to creative, right? At Locked On, when you're talking to brands about how to be authentic with your audience, right? It's almost like you have to be a brand to fan translator. How do you twist their arms? How do you work with them to do that?
I think we tap into the same kind of passion points that is in my own fandom, right? I think anybody who has worked with me knows I am extremely passionate about what I do. I love what I do, and I love our product. And that has to shine through in the work that you do. And I think that brands and advertisers, when they come and work with us, they see that excitement, and they see how ready we are to bring their brand to life. And we show other examples of how we've done that. And it's so incredible, because we're kind of an independent creator. I've worked for big organizations, and there are going to be a lot of red tape to bringing those things to life. But again, all of our content is the same essentially. So we're able to kind of come up with these ideas and scale them in like this massive, massive way. And honestly, I'm just super grateful that my brand partners have trusted me. So talk about trust. They've trusted me a lot to help bring that to life.
All right, we are going to land this plane at the top of the hour, come hell or high water. So I am going to ask one final question to all of you. What is your favorite sports podcast?
Good question.
Am I allowed to say Locked On Kings, or I can think
You
think
are
about that.
required to say.
We don't play in the golf lane, so I think outside of my Locked On podcast, which we see, I think we all see the trends. Like you never get any listener typically has like maybe 5 podcasts in their rotation. Like you just don't have time for much more. So when I have my team pods and some of the other things that I listen to, I do really like the Floor Play podcast. Is a lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of fun.
I love that when I'm at an event and someone comes up to me and said, "Have you listened to this podcast?" And I'm like, "Oh, bless your heart."
That's what we say to the Locked On Jets fans listening in July. Bless your heart.
Bless your heart. Other favorite sports podcasts?
Well, again, like I'm a Husker fan, and so I follow a former Husker player on his podcast. So I'm busting with the boys. It's mine. Yep.
Deep
Nice.
cut. Love that.
So I have 2, but I'm a huge proponent of women in sports, and I want to see more female sports content come into the space. I want to support women in sports. I want to support their voices and uplift them. So I'm a huge fan of one of our podcasts with Katie Nolan, who I mentioned earlier. She's on the rise. She's super smart, and I think she gives a great perspective. And then I would be remiss if I said I love the Kelcie brothers. I think they're just fun. I think they are, they're a little bit of women in sports because, they brought the Taylor girlies in. So I support them. So, yeah, they're a lot of fun and I think driving great conversation.
Awesome. I listen to, I listen to an incredible number of NBA podcasts, especially. But just to throw as somebody out there who is not related on stage, I listen to Ryan Russillo a lot. I'm a big Ryan Russillo fan. So we are human as well, the 4 of us, we sports fans. And on behalf of Bryan, Kia, and Kellie, thank you very much for the gift of your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank y'all so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tom.